I represent Shannondale and Beyond, a website that's been established up on the Blue Ridge Mountain. And we got interested in some of the history of the Blue Ridge Mountain. And in particular, one of our treasures up there, Shannondale Springs. Now, first a warning. I got a little too, I haven't used this maybe twice before.
You have a quick trigger finger.
Apparently. This is not a history lesson. There are people that are much more versed in history than I. There's a lot on our website that the library has been the museum has been kind enough to provide to us, and I'd recommend that you go there if you want to find out more about the history. We also have a file up of Bill Terriot's history of Shannondale, which I think is probably the definitive history. And it's replete with footnotes and whereases and heretofores and things like that. This is not going to be a history lesson. And I'm not a historian. This merely is trying to introduce you all to Shannondale Springs, because I don't think too awful many people know about it. It'll just be a quick overview of the springs, and then, as I said, the library, the museum, and our website has much more information on this. That's the frontispiece. I just love that for some reason. You'll be seeing a lot of that. I've separated into different eras. In 1819, the springs interested some local businessmen, and they decided to develop it as a medicinal spring, a spa, if you will. Now, to get us oriented, these are the springs here on the horseshoe bend of the Shannondale River. It's pretty straightforward why that's called that. This is Route 9, the Shannondale River Bridge, Daly Bridge, I guess it's still called, in Charlestown, and the Cabletown Pike to go down here. Incidentally, the only way to get to this Shannondale Springs with ease in the antebellum years was the ferry across the river from the Cabletown Road. This is the earliest picture we have of Shannondale Springs. It's stylized, but we're looking from the west bank to the east bank of the Shannondale. You can see some type of watercraft here, perhaps the ferry, and the ferry landing, the ferry building here. And it's more stylized than anything. I'd take the pictures with a grain of salt. In 1821, the proprietors, who were local businessmen, got a Dr. DeButts up here to certify the medicinal quality, or medicinal, the medicinal properties of the water. It cured high blood pressure, rheumatism, auto-intoxication, kidney conditions, albuminuria. I think that's when you urinate albumin. But looks pretty good.
And that's when the kidneys don't filter the way they do, so you lose protein.
Okay.
So it indicates kidney
problem.
Kidney problems.
Pustula eczema, that sounds like a pretty nasty skin disease. Acne vulgaris, neurasthenia, nervous disorders, constipation. Has some magnesium in the water. Chronic dyspepsia, I think that's stomach upsets back in those days. They called liver troubles. Furred tongue. I had that quite a bit when I was in college. on Sunday mornings. But you can see the darn water cured just about every known every known malady known to man. And not surprisingly, with all those cures, the property grew with great rapidity. And you can see this is a engraving by C. Burton, which was done in 1831 from a photograph, probably around 1830. You can see the large building and several outbuildings. This is Lover's Leap, if you're all familiar with the area. There's an escarpment across the river. And you can see a few boats going across the river to the springs area. And it grew even more. This is an 1845 picture. You can see this probably, I don't know if it was this big or not. That shows 4 stories and dormers, but it got right popular. And the people visited the property to get away from the swampland in Washington, in Baltimore, and the coastal areas. But when they got away, they had an added benefit. They got away from the mosquitoes that carried yellow fever, and the sewage that carried cholera, and the lice that carried typhus. So no wonder they felt better when they got up there. In its heyday, we're pretty sure that at least 6 presidents visited the property. George Washington, of course, surveyed the area. Monroe, there are letters written by Monroe calling the place the Summer White House. And these other gentlemen some of them were Whigs, which the proprietors were, and they touted or promoted some of those politicians to come up. A son of President Tyler is said to have drowned off the river, so we could add him to the list, perhaps, of presidents that visited.
Was he about 5 or 6 years of age?
I'm not too sure.
I don't know, there's a little side note to that a president's son hunts the Shannondale River.
It could well be. And again, remember my warning. I'm not a historian.
Well, this is...
But it's conceivable that Jefferson and some of these other people, other presidents visited the site too. We know Jefferson was up here when it was in its heyday. And some of the others, it's not would be likely that they might have stopped in at the Summer White House. And many notables, including a lot of politicians and business moguls, and even Emma Southworth, who was the Barbara Cartland or the Nora Roberts of her time. You can still buy some of these books on eBay, as a matter of fact. But I understand, I have not read the book, but I understand it has little to do with Shannondale, but it was purportedly written here at the resort. And this is the opening stanza of a right laudatory poem, and I guess it kind of exemplifies what I kind of feel about Shannondale. I grew up there, and maybe it's a little corny, but people in the early days, got to the property by the B&O Railroad to Charlestown, coach down to the ferry on the Cabletown Road, and then across to Shannondale Springs here, or the Southern Railroad up to Bluemont, across Snickers Gap by carriage, and across Castleman's Ferry, and then they'd go north on the Cabletown Pike.
Are there any remnants left on the Cabletown Road of where the ferry was? Is a little bit left of the ferry?
Now I couldn't answer you that on the Cabletown Road. I don't think so. I don't think there's any. anything visible there on that side of the river. But we're going to play pretend here. We don't have any photographs of the resort in its heyday, so we'll pretend that this is. And just keep in mind, it was probably a little finer than what the photographs we have, a little more grandiose. But this is the ferry, Shannondale Ferry. You can see the coach, and it was tethered by a cable to keep it drifting down to Harper's Ferry when it went across ran across the river. And it was propelled by a pole, and generally either by freed blacks or slaves. It would just push the barge along across the river. This is a gentleman that we think might be Lawson Goins, who was a freed black ferryman. And various activities. Here they're gathered around the spring house back here. And taking a sip of water either before they went boating or afterwards. And there were cabanas, if you want to call them, in a beach resort you'd have cabanas. Well, they had presidential cottages here where you could rent the presidential cottage for a little more than you would a room in the hotel. You'd have your own privacy. This is one of those buildings. And this gal looks like she's got her fishing pole right in front of that other one. But they sure did. They got it dressed up to go fishing. And here they're in a john boat getting ready. I don't know, maybe she's reading a map. But if they're afraid of the water, they could always sit at the bank. There was beaches that was swimming there. And this is Lover's Leap that we mentioned before. It's about 100 foot tall, the escarpment, limestone, and it's pretty much straight down. Lover's Leap, there is a legend about rival tribes and the Romeo and Juliet leaping to their deaths. And obviously that's the reason it's called Lover's Leap. I don't think there's any veracity to it. Yes, some people.
Kayak down there, and that's the only place I can think of.
Some people named Milano have that. Now, when you went there, some people went there to get better, to drink the water. And this is just a regimen that you go through. I'll let you read it. I don't know what they serve for breakfast. You'll see what they serve for supper in a moment. No lunch. More water. Then you could exercise a little bit with quoits, is like ring toss, and kind of a cross between ring toss and horseshoes. Then you could schmooze with your fellow inmates. And there's your sumptuous repast. Now, I don't think I wrote into here. I meant to put terpsichore delight. Maybe I did later on in here. That's just a word I ran across, so that terpsichore delight. But anyway, at 9 o'clock you got to bed, and you were really a little too tired to feel bad. Now, there was other things going on there, and unfortunately we don't have any pictures of that, of the interiors of the building. There was shades of Charlestown over here. There was horse racing, jousting, if you're familiar with jousting. It's you lance rings as you go along. It's a national not the national, the state sport of Maryland, I believe. A gambling casino, a 100-foot long bar. There it is, Terpsichorean Delight. That's of or related to dancing. That's your new word for today. And it was the in place to be. It probably rivaled any of the spas on the East Coast, from Saratoga to the Greenbrier and some of them down in the South. It was world renowned. And one indication was that they had their own china that they ate off of. I think we have a plate over here. One thing I will mention, and that's what we've done on our website, and I don't have up here, is we've taken some of these brochures and booklets and we've scanned them so that you can look inside of them instead of downstairs. They have a case, I'll show you in a minute, but on the website you can actually look at the pages, which is what we, because we don't want people running through the pages and wearing them out. Now, this is a broadside. They apparently kept improving it, and it was changed hands here in 1856. Now, one of the reasons I'm doing this show is that somewhere people have items like this stuck away in their attics, particularly the local folks, and perhaps they might be able to get them to the museum and share them with y'all. This was found in a family Bible of Mr. Goins that we saw a little bit earlier. The great-great-great-granddaughter found this in the family Bible and provided the image to us. It just, you know, makes it sound so nice, and you even had the best of the cigars. Now, fate curtails success, and from the Virginia Free Press, fire destroyed the place in 1858. I don't have a picture of it, so I'm showing you this, which kind of hurts me. But this is, of course, the Shannondale Clubhouse that went up here in 2003. But it must have looked like that. A nice wooden building, fully involved. And so that ends the first chapter. It burnt. Now, I said here, what if? Of course, this is the Greenbrier. But if historical events hadn't intervened, we might just have the Greenbrier out there on the horseshoe bend of the Shenandoah. Unfortunately, or depending on what you think about history, this guy showed up in 1859, and the war started in '61, and just kind of people lost interest in Shannondale Springs. We don't know much about the springs during the war. We do know that Mosby was all through this area, and there's one report on Google that a New York infantry unit took some rebel prisoners. But we hope to be able to uncover some more information just by having this up on the internet. Maybe people will Google us and see something in their shoebox they've got hidden away. After the war, the ferry kept running, and people used it for religious retreats and holiday events, and just day trips to the springs. And it was for sale, really, I guess, for all that time. Ever since it burnt down, they were trying to unload it. All that remained of the Grand Hotel were a few walls. And we'll go to the third chapter. It was sold, the economy improved, and investors bought it and rebuilt the hotel right on top of the ruins of the old one. It wasn't near as big, but it's still a pretty good sized building there.
Is this an actual picture?
This is an actual picture of the second incarnation of Shannondale Springs. And I do like those odds. The group that bought it, and I'm sure a lot of you folks have heard about the Charlestown Mining and Manufacturing Company. They developed a lot of areas here in Charlestown and Branson. But they were involved in the resurrection of Shannondale. But the economy, I guess maybe they had a depression or something back in the late 1800s, and it was sold at auction to a gentleman named H.C. Getzendanner, who I understand still has some relatives that live in the area. And he reopened the resort and touted in this, there's a booklet over here that was one of his brochures, and he touted these amenities. We're not too sure about these electric fans here. I guess they had if they had telephones, they must have run some wire across there, or they had an electric generator. It's a question I don't have an answer to. And here's a picture of the hotel and some of the ladies out doing whatever they're doing. Now I've got some mystery photos here. These are copies of photocopies, scanned, so there's really bad resolution. But if anybody knows where these came from, I sure would like to know, so I could scan the original photograph. This gives you a pretty good idea. This one and this one here shows two of the springs. There were 3 springs. The reason they call it Shannondale Springs. And this shows probably the only extant spring that we can find out there. But if anybody knows where in the heck these things came from, I sure would like to know too. And of course in the early 1900s, Victorian principles, they didn't allow any spirituous liquors out there, but it looks like they still had fun. I don't really know what those ladies are doing. But Mr. Getzendanner lacked the various business enterprises to augment his operation of the springs, even though the price was right. Better than Motel 6. He was unable to keep the place going, and the resort burned down, reportedly of suspicious origin. Now, I don't know what that means, but that's what I saw in the write-ups. But it burnt down again in 1909. And for about 50 years, we were back to the day trips. This is a ferry down at the Big Eddy, where the Daily Bridge, Route 9 Shannondale Bridge is. But the only way to get to the place was the ferries until the 20s, when the bridges were built. A guy named Fry bought the place, and you're supposed to pretend that's a sugar beet here, because he wanted to raise sugar beets. And he offered the resort's grounds to friends, but the beets didn't make a go of it, so he rented the property to a guy named C.O. Crane, who had the radical idea of building a country club, which looks to me pretty much like the White House, and selling lots and giving yourself a membership in the, if that sounds familiar to Shannondale Club, it didn't make a go of it for some reason. I guess we were too far out in the sticks at that time. And then he wanted to sell water, and apparently that didn't go over well either. And in 1937, Thornton T. Perry, a well-known resident of Jefferson County, started buying up the property. And for 50 years, it was used essentially as a farm. Now, Mr. Perry's nephew, Thornton Perry II, and his kids, Thornton III and Eleanor C.P. Reed, made the property available to the public in 1982, as per Thornton's wishes, that it may be made available to the public. And the plaque is down there on Shannondale Springs Road that leads to the resort, commemorating that effect. And we'll bring ourselves up to the present day. The ceremony wasn't held till 1989 to install the plaque. But that is when it was, the ceremonies were held. I think we had the governor up here and other political luminaries to celebrate the event. And, well, from our standpoint, the historical standpoint, the Department of Natural Resources, who were the ultimate recipients of the property, didn't have any interest in Shannondale Springs. They just wanted people to go out there and hunt on the property. And that brings us to the birth of the Friends of Shannondale Springs. Primarily, people would go there, like you mentioned, kayakers would see the area there and stop in, and people from Avon Bend, which is right across the river from there, would visit, and just it piqued their interest that there was still some rubble there. There wasn't much. The place, unfortunately, was bulldozed, the majority of it, so that the cattle wouldn't get hung up in the ruins. Now, we're going to appoint a hero to our show here. Some of you may have heard of this guy. Bill Hartgroves was a resident of Avon Bend, and he got interested in Shannondale Springs and worked it like a dog working a bone. I've said excuse us, Bill, because he did become obsessed with it, and was able to finally convince the Historic Landmarks Commission to press for a lease from the Department of Natural Resources. And the area in which the ruins are is now leased to the Jefferson County Historic Landmarks Commission. FOSS had 5 goals: to stabilize the property and not let it deteriorate any further. There was one extant building on the property, an old spring house, bathhouse. They wanted to restore that. They wanted to include it on the National Registry of Historic Places. Do study and research. We've been told that it's probably one of the richest areas for archaeological research in the county, and it just that they wanted to study it more. You go away, you've got two buildings built on top of each other that were burned, so there's a lot of stuff in there, I imagine. And education and maintenance, which is essentially what I'm doing right now. This was the bathhouse, and the FOSS members, primarily from Avon Bend, cleared all the underbrush out, and it's nasty. That multiflora rose is a killer. And for restoring it, they contacted a group in Williamsport, Maryland, named Gruber Restoration, and they essentially took it down, numbered the blocks, like you would when you're restoring something, and then they put them back up in the same configuration.
Who paid for that?
Well, That was residents of the county. Bill and the Foss members went out and shook the bushes, and were able to raise, probably about $20,000 or better dollars to do all the grant writing and restoration work. This is the inside of the building, and I apologize, I don't have, there's a depression here. It's about 3 foot deep, and about 6 foot by 4 foot, that may have been used as a bathing area, and a spring house, which probably had water from a surface stream running through it during the farming operation, keep the milk cool. Now, I say we don't have any images of people shaking bushes to get the money or writing grants, but we can proudly present the Foss Hall of Fame, and I've just took it upon myself to name these people. If anybody else wants to be on the list, volunteer. But the County Historic Landmarks Commission, Bill Hartgroves, Bill Terriart, Carmen Kramer, who was an archaeologist, and she's also on the Landmarks Commission. Bill Drennan, who was out of Shepherdstown and was involved in the, I want to say, cultural and historical, he was director of that group down in Charleston. I think they've changed the name since. These are a couple DNR folks, I believe. And of course, you all know Dale Manuel and John Doyle, I'm sure. Jim Taylor is a black guy who's active in the NAACP and black history of the county. The Perrys, Susan Winter Trail, who was a NPS.
Excuse me, are you the same Perrys with the hardware store and newspaper?
I don't believe so. They may be kinfolk. No.
Come on, I'll bet you they're
Well,
no.
there's someone there that might know.
And then there's another, there's a Perry farm or something on the way into Winchester. It's around 340.
No connection.
No connection.
Well, that's right, I was thinking that.
Okay.
Well, they did it. They got it on the historical registry, the National Registry, which was quite something. Now, in study and research, except for a small test pit, here's the bathhouse, a small test pit in which they did find some pot shards and a couple glass bottles and a few other items. No archaeological work was done. And some final touches were done, planting with period daffodils. I think his might be Queen of the Nile was the name that sits in my mind. And some boxwoods. And here's before and after. And I say 3 out of 5 isn't bad. It's not a passing grade, but they got it on the registry. They include, did. Well, here I've got them written up there, don't I? They were able to stabilize it, restore it, and get it on the National Historic Registry. And interest flagged, but I will say that's not quite accurate because Bill, our hero, got with these people here, which happens to be right below us. If no one's been to the museum, I'd highly recommend it. This is a kind of a wide-angle view of the museum, and Shannondale Springs has a display case right over here where some of these items behind me are displayed. There's another picture of it. There's the plate and the engraving we use as a logo in the watercolor. Well, Bill Hartgroves had some other commitments and couldn't keep up with Shannondale Springs. Back in the early 80s, it kind of fell into into disrepair. But I showed some interest because I had put up a website with some information on Shannondale Springs. And the Historic Landmarks Commission and Bill were generous or enough to give our website stewardship of the property, to try to tout it. And I guess you do. We want to do three things. We want to continue maintenance of the property. We want to improve accessibility for people like me that use a cane, or the elderly, and maybe weebelows and little tykes to get back there, which it just isn't suitable for that right now. And we wanted to have a continuing search for news articles, correspondence, anything that maybe the library could use and we could include on our, the museum could use, and that we could include on our website. I just want to get you reoriented here. This is the Horseshoe Bend. This is Avon Bend. The ferry, Cabletown Road, would be over here. Mission Road. And that just should give you a general idea where we are. Anybody have any questions about that?
So how do you get, I mean, how would you get to it? And since you can't go across, there's no ferry any longer, how would you get to Shannondale Springs?
Well, you come down Mission Road,
okay.
and there is a road just past the child care center that's
Oh, yeah, Miss
Grammy's place, I think.
Yeah, Grammy's, okay.
And there's a road named Shannondale Springs Road, and it goes down to a boat landing.
Okay,
And there's a nice parking area there.
okay.
Yeah, there's also some, the pelts of some dead critters laid out very nicely, at least they were last fall.
I think, well, I think we picked up some of those. We have, we've adopted the spot down there, as the Friends of Shannondale Springs has adopted. The Highway Department, or DEP, now has a program for adopting spots. And I remember packing up some of that nasty stuff into a plastic bag, which I'm not really supposed to do, but it was, well, you know, there's that. Anyway, you can park down here, and it's a good long hike in here. Now, we do have the key to the property.
Whereabouts would the bathhouse be?
Where is it from there?
Right about in this area. Here is, that's Lover's Leap, and directly across is the area where the springs are. And the road back to it, I said we have the key, and we occasionally take work parties back, or people that are not capable of walking back that far. It's about 1.5 or 2 mile walk back in there. Yeah. But the road's kind of rough. It's a tight squeeze, let's say. And
Oh, and then it's beyond the parking area?
that's beyond the parking area. There's a road that travels along,
Okay.
and the Department of Natural Resources maintains trails in there for the conservation officer to make sure that they aren't poaching and fishing without a license. Well, we mentioned that things grow down there right quick, and that's the bathhouse there.
Oh, my.
After 5 years. And Bill, this is Bill Hartgroves, he just about threw me on the ground and put his knee on my chest and said, "Here's the key, it's yours." He wanted out. But he took me down here in 2004, last year, the year before last now. And this was a before and after kind of picture. A fountain in front of the second Incarnation Hotel was a fountain bowl. One of the few things that remains. And we got one of the members of our discussion board, E-Man, with the weed whacker, and we were able to to do a pretty good job of getting it back to where it had been. Now we plan on going down this spring, and this might be some of the things you'd see. This is the one spring that's left. It's about 8 foot deep, and it stinks to high heaven, which means it must be good for your health. And here we are mapping out our strategy. Now you mentioned the remnants of the ferry. This is Shannondale Road, or now Hawthorndale Road for some reason. I think the Historic Society wants to change that back, get them to change that back. But this is off the Cabletown Road back here, and the ferry would be launched on the west side and come across. And if you note the hole in the tree, you can see where the cable was tethered. Since the current goes down this way, you can see how it chafed the inside of the hole there. Of course, that's probably 50 years. That hole was considerably bigger 50 years ago. And we do allow breaks when we take people down there. We don't work you to death if you wanted to join into us. And this is a before and after picture. These are the ladies.
Clear improvement.
Now you can see that house that you were referring to. That's the Milano, a family called Milano. And I sure would like to be able to get up there and stand on their deck and take a picture down. But I just haven't had the time. I think I've pretty alluded to the reason I'm here and the reason I'm talking about this. But we wanted to spread the word about our treasure. And we need volunteers. All the heavy work's been done. All that raising of the money has been done. All we need is some people that like the outdoors and like to get down there and whack a few weeds and that type of thing. We need volunteers to educate the public. Great goodness, someone surely can do a better job than I am. We need volunteers to improve signage. This would be an excellent project for a Girl Scout or a Gold Project or a Boy Scout Eagle Project to improve signage and put in some benches down there for people to rest on the way in. We need volunteers to find, I don't know how to write a grant, but surely somebody knows how to write a grant that could get some money to have further archaeological studies of the springs. And volunteers to cut the weeds and maintain access to the property. Volunteers to look through those old shoe boxes and boxes in the attic and see if you happen to have kinfolk that frequent the springs, maybe you have some memorabilia or items that would be of interest to us. But most of all, there's a theme here, isn't there? It's all volunteer work. Now, you can find all this information at the website here, and also have some information up there on the iron furnace that a Dr. Dickinson has put together, and that's the exhibit is downstairs too in the museum. It's kind of an adjunct to this because the reason it became known was George Washington was up here looking for iron deposits and ran across the springs in his surveying when he was surveying. So I guess that's about it, guys. Now, did anybody have any questions or?
Well,
Yes, sir.
in all your studies, have you ever come across anything about the silver mine?
No, I haven't. That's the first I've heard about it, Roger.
Oh, really? Well, my grandfather Shud, who lived across the river, talked about that. You can see And I used to think it was like a cowboy mine. I mean, back in my father and I used to walk that all the time. But in retrospect, it was probably a surface mine.
I haven't heard a word about it.
The Rice family is supposed to have a silver service made from that silver.
Well, I'll be
That was
daggone.
over there upstream from the hotel.
I'd be interested in finding, anything.
Never,
Anything I can find out about the place. We've got a pretty good. If you Google Shannondale Springs, of course, we pop right up to the top. But Shannondale, if you just Google Shannondale, we come up, and then if you search for Springs of Virginia or West Virginia, we come up on that search too. So we're establishing a presence on the internet, and maybe we can get some more information as time goes by. But I sure would recommend you all going down to the museum and looking at that their exhibits when it opens. I think it's April, first week of April. You're not fooling, are you? Okay, folks, I guess that's, yes, sir.
Not being a historian or a public speaker, you did a fantastic job presenting.
Well, thank you, sir.
Very good.
I need an attaboy, because I'm just scared to death when I saw all these faces out here.
I was going to ask you, did you check Taylor's checkbook on the Civil War? You know the sketchbook?
yeah, we have one.
Maybe a picture of the house, of that building in there. Taylor's sketchbook. You checked it?
There's probably one in the library here.
The library has it.
I'll make a note to check that.
Taylor's checkbook of the Civil War. So it's got sketches in this whole area.
Is nothing in there about it?